Welcome to Introduction to Grants Research with Associated Grantmakers. My name is Michael Underhill. I am the Programs and Services Manager here at Associated Grantmakers, and I will be taking you through today's webinar workshop. For folks who are having any difficulties or issues throughout the conference, please use the chat feature in the bottom left-hand screen. We'll try to solve anything that we can, and we'll do as best as we can from our end if there's any audio issues, but it seems like everybody, for the most part, can hear me, and we're going to be getting started. So today's workshop is going to be going over the concepts and tools used in the grants research process when, and chance I can talk louder. Okay, I will see if I can do that. Let's see if I can increase hearing me. Is this better for anybody? I hope that this is better for everybody. Raise your hands if continue to monitor me if you can't hear me at all. Thank you, Susan. Okay. Hopefully we can get rolling here. All right. So again, to go over today's webinar workshop, we will be covering the concepts and as well as the tools used to prospect foundation grants for your nonprofit. To quickly go over our agenda for today, we'll be covering over what our anticipated outcomes for today's workshop are. What are you expecting coming into the room today? What are the things that you were hoping to learn? What are the questions that you have? And what is it that you're hoping to learn? I've broken down the webinar presentation into format just like any good story. There's a beginning, middle, and end to the grants research process. So we'll be covering what you need to know before you go into the grants research process, what it actually looks like, and what are the best practices once the grants research portion is over that will lead you into the other parts of the grant proposal process. I'll take you into the Associated Grantmakers directory, give you an overview and tutorial of how it actually works live in time, one of the resources we offer here through our nonprofit partners. And then we'll wrap up and cover any questions that haven't been answered throughout the workshop and see if there's any follow-up questions and see where we're at by the end of this 2 hours. See where we have found ourselves. So a little bit about AGM. For those who may not know, we are a regional association of grantmakers. There's about 37 of those throughout the country. And we are one of only 3 that also has a nonprofit partners program. So that means we have, in addition to our 125 grant-making members and foundations who are in our membership, we also have over 500 nonprofit partners throughout the state. And so between that network, we're able to offer access to our Grantmakers directory, our request for proposals database, skill building workshops such as these, both online and in person. We have on-site resource center here in our offices, and we're able to provide live in-person assistance with grants research, as well as networking programs such as our Meet the Donors program, with Meet 4 times a year, and you get to hear directly from our members and foundations on what's going on in a particular giving topic or area. We hope to act as a bridge of communication, interests, and understanding between grant makers and grant seekers due to our unique standing in the middle of the grant making and grant seeking table. So, anticipated outcomes. What were you hoping to learn today? If folks want to, I just started up a poll here for everybody to answer. So if you can go ahead and just, let me know why you signed up for today's webinar. Give us a minute, everybody, to answer this. Just get a feel for the room. Okay, pretty evenly balanced. Some folks who have never researched grants before, or grants research and grants writing has become a new job responsibility. Looking to refresh your grants research prospects. You've been doing it before, but you're hoping to find some new potential prospects. Or you're interested in what we have to say. So let's go and skip ahead to the results here. So it's a pretty balanced set of answers here. Anywhere between the 3rd and 40% folks. I find often that folks who come to AGM in our nonprofit sector, whether they've been working in the field for 10, 15, 20 years, or they're new to the field, there's oftentimes folks who are, always shifting job responsibilities. So you might have been with an organization for 10 years, but all of a sudden you find yourself now with development on your plate as shifting turnover or changes in structure happen. So we're always here to provide the resources for folks who are either new to the sector or new to the development side of the nonprofits. There's the question. So this is the next series of polls. I just want to get a little bit of feel for who's in the webinar. So it's going to be a series of polls coming up answering the following questions of whether or not you're a nonprofit, if you're a partner with AGM, what's your organization's budget size, your field of interest, and where you're located. So this is really for me to kind of get a sense of who's in the room so I can tailor a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about throughout to the room. So first up, let's just get a quick response, yes, no here, if you are officially a 501c3 nonprofit. All right, mostly, maybe one in here that's not, which is all right. There's consultants and consultants or fiscally sponsored projects. All right, so skip the results there. For the most part, we have some mostly nonprofits, but doesn't necessarily apply for everybody. All right, so just if you can just go ahead and let me know where in the room today, if you're a member with AGM or not. It's always a good healthy balance with this, I find, about 50% folks and some folks who are not members. And this is what I always say, if folks do have questions about partnership, if you've not been a partner with AGM previously, the best people to ask are those of folks who have been partners with AGM and what their experience is like. So if folks are okay with it, I'm happy to share registration lists today so folks can connect and discuss their experience with AGM. So we have about half the room or about 37% not members, which is great. Happy to sort of go over what we have for here. Fellows, different levels of the associate and basic level. And I'm happy to talk towards the end about what the different levels sort of get for folks, or happy to talk with anyone offline as well about the different resources and benefits provided. Folks, give me your operating budget for your organization. Current year, last year, kind of ballpark figure. Again, just to understand sort of where in the room, what kind of size nonprofits we're looking at, because this will affect the grants research process and as you're sort of looking through that. Give that about 3, 2, 1. Okay. So good portion of the room from the smaller nonprofits, under 250,000 operating budgets, but we have some larger in the room as well. This is something that I find across the sector, especially and within our membership. We do have a wide variety of sizes of nonprofits as well as specialties, which will actually bring us to our next question. So if you want to pick your organization's field of interest, I know many of you will have multiple of these, but pick the one that's most applicable for today's workshop that will make the most sense for you to best identify your organization's focus of services. Okay, so we have a decent amount of education organizations in the room, but healthy spread from health and human services, arts and culture as well, sports and recreation, as well as public affairs, safety, and community development. And as I had said, a lot of your organizations will be able to apply to several of these, but it'll be important to be able to identify which ones are important to your organization and when you're sort of trying to find a good match. And lastly, geographic focus. Not necessarily where your organization is located, but where you provide services. Whether it's could be much larger than just one region, but where is the most highly focused geographic area that your organization is providing services in. Let's just give us a good idea of where we're coming in from in the room and who's in the room here. All right, skip to the results. So I don't think it's any surprise that there's high focus of nonprofits in the room are located in the greater Boston area. There's high concentration, both nonprofits and foundation in the greater Boston area, but we do have a healthy spread from across the state and region here, which is very good to see. One of the main reasons that we wanted to offer webinars like the one today is for folks who are not as easily able to access our workshops in person here in our offices, or even if you are in Greater Boston, we know it's not that easy to get out of the office, and there's a time cost there. So I'm very happy to be able to get folks in from across the state and healthy spread across the geographic focus here. Okay, so I have a good sense of who's in the room. As always, it's a nice healthy spread of nonprofits and types of organizations and sizes and locations, and that'll inform a little bit of what we're telling, but I'll spend a little bit more time in certain places than others. So the beginning of the grants research process. Before you even start looking for potential grant opportunities, potential RFPs, potential foundations to begin applying to, there's a few things we should cover. One of the questions I asked earlier was if you're a nonprofit. We had a pretty high percentage, so I'm not going to spend too much here, but for those who may not be a nonprofit, there are other avenues to secure funding through foundations and grant makers. The most common one is fiscal sponsorship. There's organizations that will serve as the 501c3, and then you can apply for funding through a fiscal sponsor, so you don't necessarily have to be. And one thing just always good to note with this, if you are a nonprofit already, something that you may consider as a revenue generator is being a fiscal sponsor for other organizations if you have the capacity to do so. Most fiscal sponsors will charge an administration fee for the grants that they serve for their fiscal sponsors or the revenue that's generated through them. So something to consider on both sides if you are a nonprofit or if you are not yet a 501c3 officially. So before you go into the process of looking outward for potential matches in the grants research process, you really want to make sure that you're really fully educated about your education, or your organization, and educate yourself about your organization. So that can mean a numerous amount of things, but mostly, importantly, what is your organization's mission statement? Is that something that rolls easily off the tongue? Is that something that you need to look up? Is that something that you understand is true to the work that you're doing, and is something that you're very comfortable being able to talk about? The history of your organization. How long has it been around? How long has the leadership been around? What is the who is in your position before you in relationships with funders? Who have you currently funded? being able to know as much about the history of your organization is important as you go into developing relationships with potential funders, as you'll need to know kind of what has happened beforehand. Do you have a specific need statement, or is there a specific need that you're trying to fill with this? Grants research, is it for a specific program, for general operating? What is the need that you're trying to fill? And so is there a clear idea of what you're attempting to secure? If you are looking at specific program funding, knowing what the goals are, if there's communities and populations that you're serving, being clear about that, and what is the impact that you are intending to have? And that word impact is definitely a capital I word. It means many different things to many different people, but the point being, can you be able to talk about the difference that you're going to be making in the communities and populations that you're serving? Knowing what your expenses and budget looks like is going to be very important. It's one of the first documentations that funders are going to be interested in seeing, is that you have a healthy financials and that you have a plan for your expenses for a specific program, for your general operating. Who else is, what are your other sources of funding? Not very few funders want to be the only funders on a particular project or something, so they want to know that there's other folks funding something, supporting something, that there's that kind of vetting in that process. And then another big capital E evaluation. There's many different conversations and many different ways in which evaluation can be measured, but the really most important thing that you're going to want to identify is, and being able to speak to a funder, is if you have a plan to measure the success of your programs, whatever that means to you. How do you know at the end of a program, at the end of a term, at the end of a given year, how will you measure success? So as you are setting up everything and continuing to look and educate yourself about your organization, another way to think about that is, what is an outside organization going to be finding out about you if you're not sending them information, but if they're just sort of looking for you? What happens when somebody's finding you? So obviously the first place is your website. Do you have one? Question was that it's become a lot easier in the recent years to create a manageable website that is clear and communicative and can be easily updated and really displays what your organization is attempting to accomplish. So making sure that the content and navigation is in good shape. Is the mission statement easy to find? Is the staff and board easy to find? Any information that you want to find. So like looking from an outsider's perspective, what is the experience for a potential funder who is looking at your website? What's the information they're going to want to know? Other sources and places that potential funders are going to be seeking out information about you as a nonprofit. One organization is GuideStar. GuideStar is a website, if you're unfamiliar with it, that imports data from nonprofits' 990 forms, and you as an organization are able to claim your profile and make sure that it's all up to date, and even can enhance the profile by providing more transparency and really make sure that everything is up to date, that when a funder is looking up for your organization, whether it's through your EIN number or just searching for you through GuideStar because they heard about you, they are going to be looking to GuideStar. So that's a place that you can check that up. And this is a live link you'll receive in the, here, let me see. Looks like we're having some difficulty seeing the GuideStar slide. Does that work? Folks seeing this? Okay, looks like we're up to date there. Great. Thank you, Lori, for grabbing that. I appreciate it. And if there's any questions about the GuideStar profiles, we're happy to sort of help you out and get you up to date. There are paid memberships through GuideStar, but you can claim your own profile for free. There's no cost to that. Lori, I'd be happy to just explain a little bit more offline about the specifics on that. So just feel free to email us after the presentation. This is an example of what the sort of GuideStar profile looks like. This one you see up there is in the right-hand corner. There's a gold star. There's different rating systems there. It's not necessary to have that gold star rating, but they rate that based off of the amount of information that you are providing to the amount of transparency that you're providing around your financials, your programs, your operations, and just mission statement as well. But it's a really good, easy place. It's all information you're going to need for a potential grant proposal anyways. So it's good practice to get that all up to date. And if funders are going to be looking at it, it doesn't hurt to have your information up to date. For those of you who are located in the greater Boston area, and one place that you'll definitely want to make sure that you have a profile set up is through the Giving Common. That is set up through the Boston Foundation. So anyone who is seeking funding from the Boston Foundation will need to have a Giving Common profile set up. And it's a lot of the same information, a little bit more detailed, and can seem a little bit monotonous, but it, again, is all information that you're going to be using for grant proposals anyways, and information that you're going to need to know if you're going to be applying for grant funding. Nice bonus with the Boston Foundation Giving Common is that many of the funds that are located within the Boston Foundation are restricted funding or donor advised funds, which means that the donors to the fund, the donors who are providing this money to the Boston Foundation have a say in what the funding is what's going to happen with the funding. And this is a place where your nonprofit can be found and searched for within these potential nonprofits. So again, it's a place that it's no skin off your back to not have it set up and make sure that it's there for someone who might not have heard of your organization otherwise. So way to get that set up. So just a little bit of, I like to include these next slides as a sort of overview of the private giving in the country, sort of the landscape of private giving is just a reminder on sort of where the amount of, the percentage of private giving is in the country. This is from 2016. As you can see, most of the private giving still comes from individuals. About 72% or $281 billion is from individuals. And a lot of that is tied into giving into institutions and larger institutions, but not to forget that your individual donors are still a major, major factor in your diversified revenue profile. So one of the most important things that you're going to want as you start to develop relationships with funders is be able to demonstrate that you have many sources of funding, and individuals are a major part of that. Foundation giving is the next largest, which is what we'll be focusing mostly on today, is that 15% or nearly $60 billion a year is given out by foundations, followed up by bequests or wills that are left about 8%, $30 billion, and corporations, which actually seem like they might have the largest amount based on their size, but actually a fairly small portion of the private giving in the annual numbers, about 5% or $18 billion. This is just another slide showing the sort of breakdown of where that private giving is going based on are receiving it. So religious organizations have a high percentage of that, followed closely by education, human services, health, arts, culture, and you can almost see this reflects pretty closely the landscape of what we have in the room, which makes sense of the amount of organizations in these different areas of the larger ones. So that matches up pretty nicely, actually. So as you can see, these are numbers from I think 2013. Just gives you an idea of the amount of foundations there are compared to nonprofits. There's about, in Massachusetts, there's about 3,500 registered foundations, lots of those being smaller family foundations that are either have little staff or small staff, or no staff at all potentially, compared to the over 30,000 nonprofit organizations. So even in just Massachusetts, there's 10 nonprofits for every foundation. So anything you can be doing to put yourself ahead of the pack and preparing yourself to remove any red flags and really identifying the best mission partners possible is going to give you a leg up, and doing your research just like you are today and getting that next head up on the other 10 nonprofits for every foundation you're going to be competing with. But it's just always, again, the sort of landscape of giving. Remember, it's a highly competitive environment, and thinking about that, putting yourself in the funder's shoes, that they know that they have a limited amount of money to give out, as well as the high competition of really effective nonprofits that they won't be able to fund everyone. So just as a again, to look at what the landscape looks like. A lot of the principles that we're going to be talking about today in talking about grants research and development really applies to all facets of development. Really comes down to relationship building at the core of it. So a lot of this will be familiar to other forms of fundraising that you'll be doing for your nonprofits. But it's just good to keep in mind that a lot of these guiding principles will also apply to your relationships with your individual donors, whether there's federal government grants or state government grants, you're looking for corporate sponsorship, and earned revenue for events and fees and fundraisers, things like that. I've said it a couple times, but funders really like to see that there is a healthy, diversified revenue stream for your organization, that they can feel like they're supporting a strong, healthy organization. So don't, as you're doing your grants research, never forget the other forms of that. As we are going to be focusing on sort of the grants research process through the databases and identifying specific funders, there's another way to make sure that you're kind of keeping up to date with potential funding opportunities. Requests for proposals through these couple different resources here. We have RFP database on our website that we post anything that comes across our desks for potential opportunities. Foundation Center has an RFP bulletin. City of Boston has a listserv that they send out, I think, bi-weekly. It kind of changes, depends on who's there. But requests for proposals really represent a funder that wants attention, that wants more proposals, that wants you to contact them. The most common complaint that I have come across in my time here with AGM is that funders are really exclusive, that they're really hard to get in touch with, that they're there's no one to call, there's no one they won't answer my emails. And when you see an RFP, that is a really big red sign saying come talk to us. We are interested in receiving more funding, like more applications for this particular proposal. So that's a really great way to create or begin a relationship with a funder that you haven't worked with before. Reasons that funders use RFPs, they might be just a smaller organization that doesn't have as much attention on them. They just are looking for more applications. They might have recently changed a funding strategy. They've shifted their guidelines and are experimenting in a new field that they haven't before, so they don't have as much of a track record in that area. So they're looking for new nonprofits they haven't worked with before. And those are all great opportunities to make sure that you're looking at these RFPs and keeping up to date with them. I would not say that they're an effective way to sort of start from a foundational level of building potential grant prospects. They're more sort of fly-by-night, making sure that you're checking them daily or weekly on bulletins and databases like this just to make sure you're not missing anything. But it wouldn't be an effective way to do all of your grants research. But just something to keep in mind that you should be always checking in on these potential opportunities. And lastly, there's one question I didn't ask. I usually ask for folks' roles that are in the room. But everything I've just sort of talked about in the before stages about educating yourself on your organization really applies to everyone from all the way up from the board level and the executive level all the way down to your volunteers. And because you never know, who's interacting with who's friends with who, and that idea of developing relationships and funding, you never know who's going to be representing a foundation that a relationship might be started. So really applying these principles from the top down is a important reminder for both grants research, but also for just fundraising 101 and all of your development skills. Okay, so we've covered the beginning of the process and kind of what we need to do beforehand, really get ourselves prepped for looking for potential mission partners and good matches to begin applying to funding in foundations and grant makers. So this middle piece, we're going to be kind of going through what does that process look like, what are the tools, and how can we do it effectively and efficiently. There's a few sort of, I would say, three kind of guiding overall principles with this. And this will touch on some of the end as well, is that one of the most commonly uttered phrases in my time here has been, one foundation, and that means one foundation. And that really means each foundation is going to have its own specific, unique priorities and giving guidelines and reasons for giving, and you do have to treat each foundation separately. So it won't be able to, do a broad sweeping search of, slicing and dicing a database, downloading a list of 100 grant makers and sending out a mail merge with your, ask letter. Grant makers are really smart and able to identify, see when the difference between that and someone who has personalized a grant proposal to their specific needs and their specific guidelines. So just keeping that in mind as you're going through the research process. Similarly tied to that is just the idea of just doing your homework. This whole process is tied to getting as much information and reading into the information that you can and what that tells you about the DNA of a grant maker. So each little piece of information we're going to go over has as a clue into what is important to that foundation and whether or not they're a good match for you. And lastly, some of the best information that you are going to get in sort of finding out about foundations is identifying which ones are not going to be a good match. Where can you not waste your time pursuing funding, doing 10, 20, 30 hours on a grant application if you can identify from the start that they're not going to be a good match. So just as important as finding the foundations that are a good match is being able to identify the ones that are not. Okay, let's move ahead. So in this section in the middle, we're going to sort of cover what is in the database, what's the anatomy of the database. So I'm going to be talking about the grant makers directory, and the same principles apply to the Foundation Center's Foundation Directory Online, FDO Online as well. So we're going to be covering what is in both of these, and then what is the search terms, what are we going to be using to identify potential funders, and then once we get to the grant maker profile, like what is the information that we can get, what it is in that profile, what does it tell us, what's important, and that's kind of this middle section here. So the 990 is the tax form that grant makers and nonprofits all have to fill out at the end of the year, report to the IRS, and this is really the Rosetta Stone of the databases that we use that categorize the grant maker databases. So as opposed to trying to Google or do a web search or look through, all of the grant makers are located in this database that have given money are located in these databases. So we have a really highly focused website that's dedicated to a specific thing, and the 990 is where all of that information really comes from. It's publicly available in 990s. 990s are not as fun to read, though. I don't know if anyone has looked at your own 990 or a list of a 990 for an organization that has given hundreds of grants out. They're not easily digestible or fun to read. So databases like the Grant Makers Directory through AGM or the Foundation Directory Online takes that information and puts into a much more readable format, pulling out just the important information that you're going to need to know about if they're a good match and what you need to know to begin this process to start funding. So as I had mentioned, the Foundation Directory Online is one of the larger databases with this information in it. It's got over 140,000 grantmaker profiles internationally. They also have some grantee information and reverse search capabilities. They link directly to the 990s in the profile of a funder, so you're able to do that deeper research if you want. It's a fairly expensive service. We provide it in our offices here to our partners, but if you wanted to get in your own account online, I wouldn't be able to quote it off the top of my head, but it's a much more expensive membership than, say, the AGM one. AGM, we have our own proprietary database that is serviced from a combination of our own members and our own sort of research, as well as imported data from the Foundation Directory Online. So we have, that's actually an old number there from the 1900. We have over 2,300 grantmaker profiles, and all of our grantmakers have a geographic focus on Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So we take out a lot of the guesswork with that, where our geographic focus is already honed in on our specific area. We have a nice widget that the Foundation Directory Online provides, which is called the 990 Finder. So you can go directly to a funder's 990 from our profiles as well. And we, develop relationships with our members and with the funders in our area, and we encourage them to be updating their profiles so that they make sure that the correct information is up there, because when you're relying on data that's coming from tax forms, sometimes that can be 2 or 3 years behind due to the amount of time it takes it to get released publicly from the IRS. So we encourage our funders to make sure that if they have changes in their profile, if they have strategic shifts, that we ask them to be letting us know so that we can inform our database. So you can see here, we're going to touch through each one of these, which one and what exactly there. I'm just going to pause real quick. We have a question here. Yes, grant maker is a term simply for someone who makes grants and is a funder. It's something that is an expanding term in current years. You have your traditional foundations, you have different types of foundations. That's expanding as well. I'll be going over a little bit more about what specific types of foundations are, specific types of grant makers in a little bit. So, but not a dumb question at all. All right. So yeah, so each one of these search terms is going to be something that we can use to identify potential funders that we think might be a good match for us. All right. So first things first, you can search a grant maker just by their name. That's as simple as it sounds. If you hear about a particular foundation or a grant maker or a corporate foundation and you want to find out more information about them, you can just look them up by their name. That one is pretty straightforward. Don't need me to tell you about that. Oh, double clicked. Next one. One of the two most important search terms that we're going to use is the geographic focus. And I had asked you all earlier about your geographic focus and where you're providing services. And that's one of the most important things that we're going to want to identify in our mission partners. We want to be working and connecting with funders and grant makers who have a focus on funding programs in a specific area. Now, this is not necessarily where a funder is located. It's where they have an interest in providing services. So you may find in your search that an organization is located in California or Illinois or New Mexico, but they have funding but they have a geographic focus here in Boston. And that's one thing you're going to want to really, a clue about that organization that you're going to want to identify. Why is it that they have a geographic focus? Is it a family member that is living in Boston? Or do they have a connection to a Boston company? Do they go to college here? What is the connection when it seems like it's misaligned? Most of them will be located in the communities that they want to fund, but if it's not, that's a really interesting question to sort of identify the reason why they have that geographic focus. The field of interest is really going to be the most important index that we're going to use to identify appropriate funders to begin applying to funding for. And unfortunately, it's not something that's standardized by the IRS. So, they will, places like Foundation Director Line or us here in AGM, we'll do our best to sort of generalize or see specifically, if it's not specifically stated by a foundation, where their interests lie based on their giving patterns and then types of nonprofits that they're giving to. Most of them will state it in their mission statement or their giving priorities or their guidelines. But arts and culture to one foundation might mean something different to another. It's one of the things that generally it all applies, but again, this is that principle of one foundation means one foundation, and you really want to know what community development means to one foundation as opposed to another. This is sort of this is another guiding principle. These next two bullet points here, as in regards to not only fields of interest, but just generally in grants research in general. To leave no stone unturned, but don't stretch to fit a funder's giving area. It's probably like in a nutshell the needle to thread in foundation grant research and grant writing. You obviously want to make sure that you're covering as broad a base as possible and making sure that you're not missing any potential funders who are who might be interested in funding your organization. So you don't want to make sure that you're not excluding anything that it could be of interest that could apply to your organization. But you also don't want to be creating new programs just to fit a funder's program area. And we'll talk a little bit more about that kind of concept as we get into actually looking at the profile. But it's something to just keep in mind as you're doing your grants research to be really specific as to what your organization does, the more specific you can be about your own mission, your own field of interest, your own geographic focus, will help you identify the best partners. Because the more specific and the better the match with a funder, the stronger a proposal is going to be. Yeah, it's Mike. Thank you, Michaela. It looks like some of them are moving a little bit slowly, so I apologize about that. But it seems to be moving eventually. But just keep me letting me know if the slides are not advancing. So the next few indexes that you can, or search terms that we're going to cover, are not necessarily something that you would start a grants research process with. They're more specific to maybe research projects, or if you're looking for a specific, really specific type of funding, if you're really getting down to the nitty-gritty, or you can use these indexes to narrow something down from a really large selection. Oh, I forgot my favorite saying with talking about grants research, that I usually say right at the beginning, but I'll come back in now, is that when you're coming in and doing a grants research process, the results are always going to be one of two things. Once you put in your search terms and everything, you're either going to get way too many results or way too few, and meaning that it's going to come back with like hundreds and thousands of very general possibilities, or under 10 specific foundations that match those search terms. And the work really comes in, and this is where the doing your homework and sort of turning over, leave no stone unturned, but don't stretch, really comes in with massaging the grants research to get to a manageable number of foundations that you can do effective research on. That's usually in the 30 to 50 range, I find, is where you want to be. Like that's a good number of foundations that you can really do in-depth research on effectively, but that can change depending on capacity and everything else. But anyways, back to these. So these search terms are ones that you can use to weed down those large results if you wanted to focus on private foundations or corporate foundations or public. So the difference between these types of foundations is mostly where the money's coming from. And again, it's not essential to know specifically the difference between private or public or corporate, but it is a good part of their DNA to understand where their money's coming from and why they're funneling it through this channel. So private foundation is generally supported by one or a handful of sources. So this is typically what you'll see in like a family foundation or bank charitable trust, a corporate foundation, which is separate from a corporate, corporate giving program, which I'll cover in a bit, or an operating foundation. And what this really is that these are usually smaller organizations that have a specific focus, and it's either tied to the interest of the family or interest of a bank in the community, or if they're operating foundations, say like they have their own programs or they have a specific field of interest that they're trying to accomplish a need in. And the big thing here is that they could potentially shift priorities fast, or they could be very locked into what they are interested in doing, but the decision makers are fewer, and so it's coming from one or a handful of sources, and that's really what the important thing to remember about private foundations. A corporate giving program as opposed to a corporate foundation. A corporate giving program is not a separate legal entity, so they're not subject to the laws governing 501c3s or corporate foundations, which are separate legal entities. So big thing to take away from this is that if you see something for a corporation and it says that their total giving in their profile is $0, it doesn't mean that they didn't give out any money in the past year. It just means that they're not required to disclose that amount of money. that, and the corporate giving programs are more likely tied to the marketing or communications or PR or uh, uh, employee relations sort of departments of the corporation. And so that's typically where they're doing more in the sponsorships, more in that type of program area. So again, just important to just be able to identify if you see that type. So public foundation or grant-making public charity really just means that there's many different donors to this fund. So the most common, popular version of this is a community foundation. And so that means the foundation exists for a specific mission, but they receive their funding from hundreds or thousands of donors depending on the size of the foundation. And so the discretionary funds that the decision makers there have are smaller. So they might have, let's just for an example, say they might have $1 million in giving per year, but only 100,000 of that is discretionary funds, for example, because the other funds might be tied into restricted funding for a specific focus or a specific program, or a donor-advised fund that the donor has a say in how that is distributed through the mission of the community foundation. And again, so that just means, so due to that, the strategic shifts will probably be slower in public foundations, but the discretionary funds are going to be smaller for those. So the next type here is that it's a search term that we can be using is sort of the types of support. Again, this is not something that's standardized by the IRS. It sort of really depends, standardized by each foundation giving its own definition to the terms of the grant. Most of them that you'll find are going to be general operating or program support, and really, and I'll include some documents post-program that gives some breakdowns of really the definitions of different types of supports and like what it means when it says seed funding versus capital campaign versus general operating program support. If you're going to break it down into two types of funding, it really is restricted or unrestricted. So restricted program funding, it's like the program funding or capital campaign, and that just means that there is a specific focus or a specific need for that funding. It's going to be applied for a specific program, and there's usually a report or something on the back end of a grant that is required of that. Unrestricted funding or general operating really means that they'll cut a check and there won't be as much follow-up. There might be some, but typically there won't be a grant report at the end of the process. So that's, again, just being able to identify what the funder likes to do and the expectations of that grant agreement. Then total assets really just helps you filter the grant makers by their size. So if you know the size of your ask and the size of your own operating budget, you'll kind of be able to identify if you're looking to fund a program with a $10,000 grant, a funder that's only going to be offering grants of $50,000 and more, it probably is not a good fit because that's just not the strategy that they've chosen. And lastly, this one always comes up as a question in sort of the grants research process is the term unsolicited requests accepted. This basically just allows you the ability to filter out organizations that either do or do not have an open application process. Some organizations, some grant makers will choose to seek out nonprofits and invite them to apply as opposed to having an open application process. And they're not necessarily a dead-end road. It is a longer road to funding. Developing that relationship, getting yourself on their radar just is a longer road to funding. So if you do have one of those searches that come back with over 100 grant makers based on your search terms, you can pretty easily cut that list in half by filtering out the amount of grant makers that don't have an open application process. So it's an easy place to sort of efficiently start that foundation of types of grant makers that might be a good match. Okay, so I'm going to go into a little bit of a sample exercise here. I've come up with a made-up organization, Springfield Children's Theater. You can read their mission statement here. To enrich the lives of Springfield area children through the performance of education and live theater. And Linnea, I see your question regarding the unsolicited donation, unsolicited application. I'll cover that in the sort of third segment of the end of the process. But thank you for bringing up that question. So the mission of, again, I'll just repeat this, of Springfield Children's Theater is to enrich the lives of Springfield area children through the performance and education of live theater. They're incorporated in 1980. They provide live performances, workshops, and classes, and they serve Springfield and the surrounding areas with a population. They serve youth ages in grades K through 12. So that's a very sort of broad description of sort of what this organization does. Doesn't get into too much specifics, so kind of have your imagination at the ready. So I'm just going to ask you a couple questions on what we sort of should be using for some of our search terms. So there'll be a quick polls here. All right, so what if we had to pick one geographic focus for the Springfield, if we're trying to narrow down our grant makers, what should we use here for Springfield Children's Theater? A minute here, folks come back and check in. Get some answers coming in here. And this is if we're trying to identify funders who have an interest in the Springfield's Children's Theater. All right. Skip to the results. Okay, so the majority of our results in the Western Mass and Central Mass area, which is about right there. Since the funder, since the programs that the SCT, or Springfield Children's Theater, is located in Springfield and the surrounding areas, we're going to want to identify funders who are interested in funding in that area. So if a funder only has an interest in Greater Boston, that probably wouldn't be a good match because they wouldn't see a good mission alignment with an organization that is in Western Mass if they don't provide any funding to the Greater Boston area. So that's sort of the match we're trying to find here. And what is the field of interest that we should, if we are selecting one, what is the field of interest that we should identify? Give everyone a minute to respond. All right, looks like we have most of the responses. Right, so we have arts and culture as the overwhelming response, which makes sense as a theater program. But we also have a education, which makes sense. There's education elements to the programming that Springfield Children's Theater applies. So that's something that's definitely a stone we would want to turn over, see if there's any alignment with organizations there. Community development is, it can mean a lot of different things due to the fact that they're interested in providing programs to a specific area. That's definitely something that we may want to look into. But really, arts and culture and education are the main pieces of the programming that would match up with a funder's priorities. Great. So now that we know sort of the type of search terms we can use that we can sort of narrow down the types of information and questions. And the other side of this is, what is the information that we can find about a grant maker once we, have narrowed down based off of these, based off of these different search terms. So really breaks down to three different general types of information. It's going to be under contact information, funding interests, and application information. So we'll go over into a little bit more detail about what each of those contain and what you can find out about a grant maker. So in these profiles, this is where we get into the sort of every foundation is going to be a little bit different based on what their capacity is. As I had mentioned, some foundations are small family foundations that don't even have staff. The board only meets twice a year, and they might have a pretty bare bones profile, as opposed to a fully staffed organization that has program officers and community partners and fully fleshed out website with many different programs and interest areas. So there's going to be a wide gap of differences between grantmaker profiles that you'll find. Some will be very fleshed out and very informative, and some will be will contain very little information. So something that you can take just from that about is, if you find a profile that is very scarce, sparse information, not a lot included, that tells you a little bit about, just looking at that, just a little bit about the DNA of the grantmaker, that they probably have very little staff or maybe no staff at all, that they don't have the resources to keep an updated profile or don't have a website. And so they're a grantmaker that probably isn't going to be able to get back to you very quickly with questions or responses to a application, as opposed to a fully staffed, really fleshed out profile, great website, contact information over there. They'll probably be able to get back to you very quickly because they have the capacity and the staff to do so. And these are, again, this is more of that detective work of just sort of seeing the information that is out there for a grant maker and being able to make conclusions based off of that. So under the contact information, if they have a website, it'll be included there. Their mailing address, where they're located. If they have a primary contact, that's always a really important thing to identify, so you know who to touch base with. If they're giving you a primary contact, that's the person you want to go through, and you don't want to be sort of going over their head to an executive director or a board chair or something like that. If they're giving you an avenue to follow, take that route. And then if they provide either a phone number and an email, that's great. If they provide one or the other, that usually indicates how they want you to get in touch with them. So, if there's an email address, no phone number, send an email. If there's a phone number, no email address, give them a call. If they have both, that you can kind of see what your comfort is. But they'll be pretty clear about, most of them will be pretty clear about how they want you to get in touch with them. Funding interests, and this is really the section of the profile that you're going to be able to identify good mission partners, someone that you will be able to work with to be working towards a shared goal. And and that's something that's really important in the grants research process, is to kind of try it as much as you can to take the power dynamic of, funders coming down from on high and funding your program, to really own the side of, your nonprofit is doing really good work in the community that is, a mission partner with a grant maker who is not able to do the work on the ground, that you can work together to accomplish a shared goal. So these places in the funding interest is where you're going to be able to find those partners, and the stronger that potential partnership is, the stronger potential proposal will be. First place I often look is a mission statement in a funder profile, because that is pretty much the first place I'm going to see their the funder in their own words stating what it is that they want to accomplish, as opposed to just checking types of field of interest off or types of funding or where they're interested in funding. You really get a sense from the funder in their own words what they want to accomplish with their giving. So that's usually the first place that I look and see if I can see my organization in that mission statement. Does what my organization provide fit into that mission statement? If it does, that can be a really compelling proposal, really compelling thesis statement of a grant proposal. If not, if I'm trying to stretch to fit into that mission statement, it's going to be a harder task to get the grant successfully funded, and it's going to be a harder task to make those grant dollars work effectively for my organization. Next up there is the grant program description, and that is not going to be in most grantmaker profiles. If they do have a grant program description, that's really great because it will detail different giving areas or different funding buckets that they have. So if they're interested in arts and culture and education and human services, they'll be able to describe what exactly it is they're trying to accomplish in each of those. But again, not all of them will include that. Geographic focus, again, that's just where they're interested in funding. They will put that out there and as a place, and quite simply, does your organization provide services in that area? And if not, it won't be a good fit. The fields of interest, again, we've covered these in the search terms, and this will be, again, reflected back on the profile of not only search terms that you had listed, but also any other search terms that they include in their interest area of funding. Types of support that they provide, whether they provide general operating, program support, is it just just capital campaigns? This will just tell you the types of funding, so that you're not applying to them for general operating if they don't offer it. This just gives, again, more information about the funder, so you can be as informed as possible when you're developing these relationships. And then lastly, the financial information. This will be, again, different for each one. A really fully fleshed out profile will include amount of giving in a past year, potentially a high and a low of their range of funding and number of grants. And some might just list the asset size. But you can usually get an idea of the amount of giving based off of the asset size, because they're federally required to do 5% of their assets. So that generally gives you a good idea of where they're at in their giving. Next up, anything that's included in the application information. So this is anything that is that they want you to know about to applying to them. Nowadays, a lot of them will just refer directly to their website, which is a place that they will update more frequently than a place like a database such as ours, a Foundation Directory Online. They have the capability of really quickly updating their website. Databases like ours get updated on a quarterly to yearly basis. So again, that's actually something I forgot to mention is if they do have a website, that is first and foremost the place that you're going to want to check for updated guidelines or deadlines to cross-reference your information. It's going to be really important to make sure that you have updated info. So if they have a website, make sure to double check that. What does the application process look like? How they want you to submit? Is there several stages? Is it just a letter of intent first? Do they invite you to apply? What are the deadlines? Some might have one deadline per year, some might quarterly. If they list board meeting dates, that generally gives you an idea of when they're making final decisions for these grant decisions. If they have program staff, they'll sort of make their recommendations, but the board will be making final final sign-offs on though, and then the final notice will come shortly after that typically. And then again, lastly, whether or not they provide unsolicited requests or not. That'll be included in the application information. So I've just pulled, some of the information of what will be included in a sample profile. So this is the Charles H. Hall Foundation. And so I'm just looking here at their, this is some of their contact information here. So their website is bankofamerica.com/grantmaking. So that looks like, so they are they have their fund within the Bank of America. So they're a smaller fund that is managed by a program officer who has multiple foundations working through Bank of America. So you'll be able to find all that under the Bank of America website. So again, it looks like they'll have their mailing address through Bank of America. So everything is sort of filtered through the philanthropic advisor of Bank of America. They list an email here, which is a generic email. So it's not a name or a person, but it's more of an info, a ct.grantmaking@ustrust.com. So that might be a place that I send an initial inquiry. Or it looks like should get there. I'll try and refresh it here. Hopefully that refreshed everything. Okay. And they also list a phone number, which, for my purposes, I would probably send an initial email if they said anything else, and then checking in via phone if I didn't hear anything. But yeah, but that's simply because they have a generic email as opposed to a particular person. So, and again, I sort of highlighted some things that were relevant to our sample organization of Springfield Children's Theater. So reading the mission statement here, the Charles H. Hall Foundation was established in 2007 to support and promote educational, health, and human services, religious, arts, and cultural programming for underserved populations. There's geographic focus, specifically serves organizations based in the Berkshire, Hampden, Hampshire, or Franklin counties in Massachusetts. So there you go. So highlighted for Springfield, the Hampden County, as well as arts and cultural programming. I might have also highlighted the educational round for that Springfield Children's Services or Children's Theater. The fields of interest there are, I just didn't copy and paste over because it just included right in the mission statement. So the fields of interest there are education, health and human services, religion, arts and culture. It says that the types of support strategies they provide are program support. So they don't do any general operating. All of their funding is restricted to a specific program and would require some grant reporting on the back end of that. So here's with our financial information. They have total assets here of almost $5 million, and their annual giving is in around about $225,000. They average about 35 grants a year in the range of $5,000 to $20,000. That's just a really helpful sort of snapshot of the type of giving that they do to help you right size your ask if you're going to be identifying this funder as a good match. So you'll know that an appropriate ask is between $5,000 and $20,000. Anything over $20,000 is going to be an inappropriate ask because they haven't demonstrated interest or willingness to fund in that amount. So this helps you avoid any easy red flags, because someone who's requesting more than the amount that they're willing or able to give is going to be someone that's easily written out of potential funding opportunity. Gives information on the application process. So it's an online application. So you would redirect to the website that's provided and go through the process of filling out an online application, which more and more of them are online nowadays. The deadline there's one deadline of December 1st, so you can kind of line that up within your sort of as you're sorting them out, that'll help you really target specific grants in specific areas or specific times of year, so you can make sure you know when deadlines are coming up and when things need to be submitted. It doesn't list the board meeting dates, but knowing that, but the final notice does let you know that, after December 1st, applicants will be notified of the grant decisions by letter within 3 to 4 months of the deadline. So that gives you a good idea. So it's going to be it's going to be a decent amount of time until after you submit that really probably can't expect to hear back from them until February or March. If you're contacting them in January asking about the status of the foundation, usually not a great idea if they've indicated that they're not going to be in touch until February or March. If it's April and you haven't heard from them, that would be a reasonable time to reach out and just check in about the status. But again, they've set up the expectations here with this final notice indicator. And then lastly, they do accept unsolicited requests. So the online application would be something you could fill out right as you wish. And that's really the process. It's the sort of nuts and bolts of the database process. You put in your search terms. It spits out the foundations that fit those terms, and then you do a little bit deeper digging on each of those profiles to see if they're a good fit or not. And when we get into the database tutorial, I'll show you you're able to sort of save profiles that are good fits, and you can export that data so that you're able to manipulate the data in a way that's more helpful to you outside of the web page. So now we're going to skip towards going into the end, or sort of the once the grants research process is done, what comes next is sort of the question here. So what things we're going to cover in this sort of section, sort of what do you do once you have this list of grant makers that seem like good mission partners, that seem like they could be a potential match for funding, and we'll be sort of touching base with all of the things. And many of these topics sort of lead into other workshops that we offer. So I might be, some of the questions that may come up in these topics may be more appropriate for a grant writing workshop or a donor cultivation workshop or an outcomes measurement workshop, things that I can do my best to answer now, but would be answer more fully in depth with another workshop that we offer. And you can check out our calendar for upcoming opportunities for those workshops. So first big thing to decide and make some actionable steps for is making sure that you have a way of organizing your grant maker profiles for potential funders. One very simple way, and I can send a template for this within the materials that we'll be sharing with you all, is just a simple Excel spreadsheet grants calendar. It's an Excel spreadsheet that will organize funders by their application deadline. So you can create one sheet for each month, maybe an additional one for a open deadline process, and basically gives you a way to just very simply an Excel spreadsheet. Probably the simplest way to do this, listing the organization, what's the contact information, what's the funding purpose, due dates, who's responsible, what information you need, is there a website involved, just to sort of collect yourself so you know what's coming up in January, what's coming up in February, what deadlines are coming in March, April, et cetera, et cetera. And again, there's hundreds of different ways of doing it. There's more developed each day on sort of grant management programs. It really depends on capacity, cost, and sort of personal preference, as well as potentially, existing programs your organization may already have. But the key important piece of information is keeping good organizational practice so that when you do this research, it is noted and and practicing good, good data stewardship, so that if you're working with a team or a partner, or if you're passing on the responsibilities to someone else, that they're able to see what the status of any particular funder is, or a history of engagement, or where it last was left. Like, did you apply for funding last year and it wasn't successful? Do you know why? And just giving yourself a way to organize your research, so that now that you've done the work, you can use it most effectively now and in the future. One thing to, as you're moving forward in the process, to consider is just checking out the Common Application Form on our website. This was developed originally about 20 years ago with a group of, or about 15 years ago, by a group of our members, our funder members, who wanted to make the application process easier for both grant makers and grant seekers. And so they came together and developed a common application form that included a cover sheet, full proposal narrative, diversity data form, budget template, common report form, and a final expense report. It covers a lot of the questions that you'll find in most application forms. As the years, this was updated 2 years ago, so it's gone through a refresh, and the most up-to-date active one is about 2 years old. And it is, to be quite honest, less useful as more and more organizations are able to develop their own online application. There's less of a need. We actually aren't able to track who uses the common application form. So we, funders may indicate that they accept the common application form, but we always stress that, before sending this into a funder, make sure to ask if they accept it or not. But the key is that the questions asked in the common application form are questions that are going to be asked in most grant application processes anyway. So it's important they're important questions to ask, and if you've never filled out a grant proposal before, this is a great place to start and get that practice going, to see where you are able to answer questions, and where you have questions about, where are things that are confident and where are you unsure. And I would say that anything more on the sort of like actual questions about the cover sheet or what should be in a proposal narrative will be more accessible in a grant writing workshop, which we have a few coming up. But I'll leave that there. It's a good place to practice and bring some of those questions to a grant writing workshop. Doing as much grant maker research as you can outside the profile is ideal. If they have a website, that's going to really give you a feel for what that organization is trying to accomplish. It's going to give you the most updated information, really give you a feel for what's important to them, how they operate, what their capacity is as well. You can really dig deep into their grant making and the 990 forms. Through our directory, there's a you can go directly to their most recent 990 and look and see. They're required to list every grant that they've given, and it's a bit tedious to dial down, but you can really get an idea of sort of the size and types of grants that they're giving out. The Funders DNA, this is a link to an article that, again, you'll receive in all the slides. It's a live link that talks a lot about, been talking about the Funders DNA and the giving priorities, that like what makes a funder tick really, and trying to put yourself in their shoes as they're reading your application. What is it that they're trying to accomplish, so that you can really prepare the strongest proposal to that funder specifically. And it's really important, the more you can put yourself in that frame of mind and with the information that's available, the better off your proposal is going to be. And the better off you're going to be prepared for potential conversations or in-person meetings or site visits with that funder, that you'll really understand what makes them tick. Our Meet the Donors programs that happen quarterly are really great opportunities to hear directly from funders on a particular topic area or geographic area. And also a nice reminder that they're humans on the other side of that grant proposal. And it's a nice chance to get an open Q&A and hear what are the red flags, what are the current trends or best practices in the grant proposal process. And then again, following up, if there's questions or the things that are unclear in a grant proposal or a grant application or a grant profile or a website, if there's something that's really unclear and you've done all of your homework, making a phone call or email if applicable, and demonstrating that you've done your homework in that call or email, saying, I've done my research I found your organization through the Grantmakers directory, I looked at your website, and as I was preparing an application, I was confused by this part of it. And it really shows that you have done your homework and you're not asking them something that can be answered simply by looking at their website. More on that sort of like approaching or contacting a funder. Each funder is going to be different as far as how much they want to be communicated with, and they'll often be pretty transparent about that, if they want to hear from you or not, how they want you to contact them, their preferred method of their tendencies. But I would say before, during, and after, if they're receptive to it, it's good to stay in touch, especially before submitting a proposal. I think if you have the possibility of speaking to a funder or program officer before submitting the application, the likelihood of a successful proposal it very much increases, and because it gives you a couple of different information. You get a personal sort of insight into what makes that funder, what are those funders' priorities. They get a better sense of you outside of just a cold application. They understand what you're trying to accomplish. They might have some tips or hints or a piece of advice on an application that might not be clear in a profile or a application or guidelines. They might be able to give you a little bit more of a human element to that. And depending on the funders too, or depending on program officers, if they're very passionate about the topic, about the field of interest, and they are interested in your program and feel that it might be a good fit, who knows, they might be willing to offer to look at your proposal before you submit it. I mean, that's probably pretty small. I wouldn't ask anyone to do that, but they may offer to look at it, because I've definitely heard from program officers who have done that for nonprofits to give any sort of piece of advice. So I just want to assuage that fear of reaching out to funders. They really like to hear from nonprofits as long as they've done their homework. So once you've gone through this whole process, it's good to start developing that relationship. And after a proposal, once it's been submitted, or once you have been accepted or denied funding, it's good to keep in touch with them based off of, again, every funder is different, but what is it that thanking them if it's a successful proposal, or if they offer up, if it's a denied proposal, but they do offer the opportunity for additional feedback on it, calling to see what their feedback is. One of the things I hear from a lot of program officers is their amazement at how few organizations take advantage of receiving additional feedback on a denied application, because it might have been something pretty simple, and wanting to give them a piece of advice or something that can help drive potential funding opportunity for next year. So just all of that in the realm of practicing good stewardship. Keeping, again, good records of work completed, next step, and all of this is covered in sort of some of the donor cultivation and outcomes measurement workshops that we cover. In the links that you'll receive from us, these are all live links to additional just reading and resources that are helpful, sort of grants research adjacent, for folks who are interested in fiscal sponsorship or getting your certificate, your 501c3 certified volunteer lawyers for the arts, lawyers clearinghouse, or pro bono legal services for nonprofits. Different types of diversified revenue streams to nonprofits. Bevon method is like just one of many ways that sort of describes how to, what's a healthy way to develop your revenue stream. Donors Choose is one of many crowdfunding websites that's out there, and still very new, so it's hard to offer any specific advice, but an option for specific probably programs. Fidelity Charitable has a great resource giving more information about what a donor-advised fund is. I touched on it briefly, but it's very hard to get in front of a donor-advised fund or find information about them. They're very private, and it's kind of the secret to them. But that gives a lot of the good Q&A on that. Minding the 990 gives you like what you should be looking for in a 990 in that article. Grant Space is where I got most of the definitions in the resources I'll be providing to you afterwards. And I think just to make sure I touch on this, the approaching or contacting a funder, and Linnea, you had asked about this previously, that longer road to funding. I'm happy to have a further conversation on this, but really, if an organization does not have an open application process, if they provide an opportunity to, a way to contact them, that's a great way. That's a great introductory, question. If your organization meets up with their mission statement, it's a good conversation. Sending an email to just ask if you can set up a time to talk about your program, to get on their radar. If you have signature events throughout the year that you might be able to invite a potential funder to, that's always a great way to get on there. And as well as, wait for a second. But each funder is going to be a little different. Some funders don't have an open application process, and they're not interested in new, in new applications or new nonprofits. They fund what they fund, and that's it. But if you find that out by giving them a call or an email, and they let you know that, then you can sort of cross them off your list, and that's okay. That's time you don't have to waste putting together a proposal for them. But really, the important key parts, if you're reaching out to a funder that doesn't have an open application process, is email. I would say emailing is probably the best if you can. Demonstrating your homework, where you found who you are, how you found out about their organization, what your organization does, asking if you can set up a time to discuss your program in further, or inviting them out to a signature event, something like that. There's some more nuancing things that go into that, but if you have further questions on that, feel free to touch base with me via email. So I'm going to be covering some of the databases, but if for those of you who are at the associate level and fellow level with partnership with AGM, you're able to access it online. If you are at the basic level, you're able to come into our resource center here in our offices. If you're in the greater Boston area, the Boston Public Library provides free access to the Foundation Directory online. There's different, I would always check your local library to see if they have access to Foundation Directory online. If cost is a question or a challenge or anything like that. Some other places as well that might have it is, just some different locations. These are sort of sample ones out there. I'm not sure if some of them may or may not still have the access here, but just contact your local library to see if they have access to a Grantmakers database is a question, if you're not able to get into Boston or afford a membership of your own. So with the remaining time, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to take a look at the associated Grantmakers directory, So actually one second here. Do-do-do. All right. I just want to make sure that everyone can see the grant makers fit in here. Let's see. Just make sure I can get up. Okay. That's what it looks like. No, I'm looking over my colleague Kelvin's screen. So I'm going to come back real quick. All right, to make sure I'm in the right field here. Try this one more time. Still blank. Yes, I knew my dual monitor was going to come back and get me. So great, now I have it here. So this is the Associated Grant Makers directory. If you are logged in with the at the associate level or fellows level as a partner, you'll be able to find this up here, right, this GM directory link. You also find our RFPs in this link as well. I'm not going to go over that now, but feel free to check those out. So here in the Grant Makers directory, you can see there's a pretty basic instructions at the top, as well as to the right. This is the 990 finder that you can type in the name of foundation or the EIN and where they're located, and then hit search, and this will take you to another page that you'll be able to look at in 990. Towards the end, we'll come back up and do that. So here are 7 search fields that we can use that we all talked about during our workshop today. There was the organization name, again, which we looked at. It was as simple as it sounds. I'll kind of go backwards here. You can put their total assets at a equal to or less, like is between. You can sort of right size your total assets here if you really wanted to. Types of support. So we have program support, endowment, capital, general operating, in-kind, individuals, capacity building, sponsorship. But really the main two you're going to come across are program and general operating. Geographic focus. And again, in this database, we are already narrowed down to Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So for most programs, I'm going to not include additional filters here. I might add it on later as a additional filter, but because we're already narrowed down to Massachusetts and New Hampshire, it's not as necessary to include this. But you can definitely go in and dial down to some specific areas to see if there's highly specified focuses from some funders. But most of them are going to be the state level, so no need to dial down any further. Again, you can identify the bank, the organization type. So it's a bank charitable trust, collaborative fund, funder collaborative, community foundation, corporate giving, family foundation, government, operating, other, private, public. There's different definitions in here because they all kind of fall under that private, public, corporate, but they're given different names. Again, not as important to narrow it down by this way, but really more important to see what an organization identifies itself as so you can understand what their priorities are. Which brings us to fields of interest. So for this, the two we really want to focus were geographic focus, which we've already done for Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and fields of interest. So using Springfield Children's Theater as our sample, we might want to go here under arts and culture. There's a few subcategories. Performing arts would be about where theater is going to be. Arts education might be included. I might include some other ones. If I wanted to, I could go into education, but that's much more of a broad category, so I would probably want to start more focused with these two, and then I can narrow down at a later time. So I'm going to hit search and scroll down again. Okay, so just under search results, it tells me that I returned 267 total records. It's currently showing me 1 through 50. That's probably not going to be an amount that I am successfully able to really give enough attention to each one of those 267 records. So as I'm building my initial foundational research, I'm going to want to start with the ones that do have unsolicited requests accepted. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select yes. I'm going to add that on. And I'm guessing it's going to cut us down about half. Yeah, just about 128, which is still a little bit more than I would want. I might come down to see if I want to do just Massachusetts, see what that does. That brings me down to 97, which is even further. Now, if I was to take Massachusetts out and include just the Massachusetts County of Hampden, I'm guessing this is going to bring us down much lower because it gets so specific. So let's see. This might be too specific of a search, but let's just take a look. Yeah, that gives us 4. I'll say these 4 are 4 that I'm really going to want to look at because they do indicate the Hampden County as a specific focus as opposed to a broad statewide Massachusetts. We had looked at the Charles Hall Foundation, so let's go ahead and look at the Irene and George A. Davis Foundation. Obviously, if I went back, I'd want to open that search up and apply the search term and go deeper into that 97 that have a focus on Massachusetts as well as arts education and performing arts. But we'll focus on this profile now. So here we are with the Irene E. and George A. Davis Foundation. Gives us the mission statement. So they support a variety of nonprofit organizations seeking to improve the quality of life for those residing in Hampden County with particular focus in areas of education and early literacy. Foundation investments in the community are designed to improve outcomes and life prospects for our region's youngest citizens through strategic supports in the critical areas of early childhood and education pre-K through 16. Gives us their website. I would say, if I was looking for the children's theater, early education and early literacy are kind of at that field. I definitely would want to check out their website to see what more information is there, what's been updated. They are located in Springfield. They list the executive director as well as a phone number and a fax. General inquiries email address at info@davisfoundation.org. So that would be where I would probably start with any general inquiries. And it's a family foundation, so obviously you can tell it from the name. When it's specific to a name like that, you usually can tell it's a family foundation. Very specific focus on Western Mass and Hampden County. They offer capacity building, capital support, general operating, and programs. So they really cover the gamut. There may be more specific information about that located on their website. And outside of their mission statement, we have arts and culture, performing arts, education, also health, human services, philanthropy. Gives a little bit of background here. It's founded in 1970, dedicated to the promotion of cultural education. So that's just a little bit more background outside of their specific mission statements. Got their tax ID here. It lists Mary Wallake's specific email here as a primary contact. So it lists their grant programs they have right now. So a little bit more information on early childhood as well as education, K through 12. Let's give a little bit more information about where we want to do there. They do accept unsolicited requests. All right, so and then this gets into a very detailed application method, saying that it's very specific geographic focus in Hampden County, as we had sort of mentioned earlier. Potential applicants are strongly encouraged to carefully review the information on the website prior to submitting a request for funding. So again, this is important, sort of directing us to the website to make sure it's up to date. Submission schedule. March, June, September, December, general operating grants, how to apply, capital grants, how to apply, and the last year reported was 2015, and they list $5 million in grant making out of total assets of just over $100 million. Is just around that 5% required giving, as we had talked about. So if I just from that information wanted to add that to my sort of list, I'm like, this is a good. I'm gonna, check out, go check out some more, but I want to add this to my selected and create a list that I can then download. I'm going to go ahead and click that there. And now as you see there, it says remove from yours, and it's selected. If I wanted to, I could go here and go into, put their name into the 990 Finder if I wanted to do deeper research. And this takes us to Irene Insurance different. We have our 2015. And as you can see, this is a not fun document to read. There's, let's see, 53 pages that look just like this, and it would take a long time to go and try and find the right area where their grant area is. Okay, yeah, so this lists all their grants in very small print, gives the sort of little memo about it, which is actually more as well as the grant amount. But again, that's not as fun to look at. But it is helpful when we get down to the brass tacks. So if I was then to go back to our list here, and I wanted to add each of these because I feel like they're highly there. Let's just say I did my research on each of those, and I got to the end of my research. I went through the 97, identified the ones that I wanted to look at. I'm going to reset my search, and I'm going to pull up the selected tab is anything that I have clicked off on those either side checks or within the profile. So it's going to bring up any of those that I selected, which is 4, which is the 4 I selected. And I'm able to download complete organization records to an Excel spreadsheet, or just the list of names, or just the name and mailing address. But the complete organization record gives all of the information you found in that profile, downloads directly to an Excel spreadsheet. So you can take that data and do with it what you like. And that is a basic overview of the grant research databases. You can definitely do more in depth. It's a lot easier, one-on-one or in person, or if there's some specific questions that you have regarding them. And there is, but it's best once you have a chance to sort of look into it. And once you get going and able to really look into each of the profiles and able to identify whether or not it's a good fit for your organization, and then move on the right way. I just wanted to, we're at about 10 minutes left, which is perfect timing. I want to leave open if there's any specific questions. I'll try to answer here until the end of the hour. But I also want to give folks, if they have gotten what they needed today, a chance to get 10 minutes back of their day. And I will be following up with the slides from this presentation, a link to the YouTube recording for this, as well as a myriad of other resources that are related to the information that we covered today, pretty much everything you need to know about sort of the grants research process. And if anyone's interested in specific database or partnership members or partners, partnership information, I'm happy to talk more about that. Okay, so I see a question here from Janice. And Jonathan, if you have a question with your hand raised, just feel free to type it into the chat box on the bottom left-hand corner. So I'll answer Janice's question first. Is there a way in the AGM database to search on who funds organizations that are similar to mine? Unfortunately, Janice, we do not have a reverse search capability because we don't have in our database the records of the actual grants made in the database. Ours is just the grant maker profiles. are able to do that through the foundation directory online, although that's not a completely comprehensive database. But you're able to search on just the one end of the GrantMaker profile. Janie asking, if we want to come to AGM office to use the database, how does it work? Is it walk-in appointment? Great question. So the Resource Center here in our AGM offices is a partner benefit. So you need to have a partnership with AGM in order to access our resources. The basic level for a partnership with AGM starts at $100 for the year. So you get a year from the day that you join. The associate level gives you online access, which is $330 for the year, as well as the fellows level is $540 for the year, gives you online access, free admittance to the Meet the Donors, and a customized grants research session done by AGM staff. And it is by appointment, so we do ask that folks who are coming to the office to use the Resource Center just email or call us to make sure there's an appointment on the calendar so that we have someone here. At least we always have 1 to 3 staff members here available to assist with any questions or tutorials or any sort of help in the Resource Center. And so we just want to make sure that there's going to be somebody here. Hours are 10 to 5 Monday through Friday, and generally have availability most days, but we want to make sure that somebody's here to receive you. Jonathan, the Excel sheet I made reference to be included in the resources. I believe you're referring to the grants calendar, which I had referenced earlier, and I will include that in the template for that in the resources provided. So that will be coming along in the email to everybody. And Susan, very informative. Appreciate the note there, Susan, regarding getting the PowerPoint beforehand. I couldn't give you all the information. I needed you paying attention throughout. So, but thank you for joining us this afternoon, and feel free to follow up. Janice, good question. If you do research at the AGM office, are you able to download a CSV file? Can you email that to yourself or bring a flash drive and take it home? Absolutely, yes. So once you get that data for yourself, you're able to take that data with you, and it is yours. So we can either email it to you, or you can get it on a flash drive. At this point, a flash drive is probably easiest because logging into just different email browsers now it takes a lot more triple certification and all that, but yes, you're definitely able to take that data with you. All right, if there's no more questions, we'll definitely be following up with more information, everything that you need from today's workshop, and you have our email addresses, so if there are follow-up questions regarding any of the information you heard today or about partnership with associated grant makers, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer questions that we can, and if we don't have the answer to a question regarding your nonprofit organization, we strive our best to figure out who the best person to contact would be regarding that question. So feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll do the best we can to get you a satisfactory answer. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Grants Research webinar. We're very happy to be able to provide this service for folks, and hopefully we'll be able to offer other webinars in the future. But we hope to be able to see you in person as well at upcoming programs. So without further ado, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your Wednesday afternoon. Thanks, everybody.